your body's really smart. If you're not getting enough sodium, what happens is you start losing 10 times the amount of magnesium in your sweat. And so that's how low salt diets can lead to magnesium deficiency as well. Mm-hmm. And in regards to, I know you really want to know, like, what is the more optimal amount of sodium to maximize insulin sensitivity? There was a publication in type 2 diabetics from Ames in 2004. It compared 3,000 milligrams of sodium to 6,000 milligrams of sodium. The 6,000 milligram sodium intake significantly improved like insulin AUC and oral glucose tolerance tests.
Welcome to the Fundamental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Saladino. This podcast is the result of my relentless search to understand and correct the roots of chronic disease and illness. In this podcast, I will share with you everything I have learned about how to live the most healthy and radical life possible. Thanks for joining me on this journey. What is going on, you guys? Welcome to another week of the Fundamental Health Podcast. It's so good to be here with you all. This is a super fun one that I am excited to share with you with James DiNicolantonio. Also want to tell you, my book is coming out February the 11th. You can go to my website, thecarnivorecodebook.com or Carnivore MD, which has a link to that. If you want to pre-order is only available through the publisher for another week or two. And then on February the 11th, the seasons change and my book is out there for everyone to read, and it is amazing. It is at the printers right now. It is so good, you guys. Well, I guess I wrote it. I think it's good. I'm getting great reviews from people that are editing it and that my friends who have read it. And so anyway, check out the Carnivore Code book. Support me with a pre-order if you'd like. Otherwise, stay tuned. It's coming out in a few weeks. Tell all your friends. Tell everybody. I also have a new t-shirt, which you can get on my website. Go to the merchandise tab if you want to support me. It says Stay Radical on the front. I'm going to be posting about it. I will repost if you tag me in that photo. And if you love this podcast, please leave me a review on iTunes or whatever medium you listen to me on. If you are on YouTube, leave me some comments, whatever. But please support this podcast. Leave me a review. I'm basically right at 500 reviews. And you know what? I want to just get to 1,000 like real fast because this podcast is growing. I love doing this and I love delivering the content to you guys. So this week I have James DiNicolantonio. James is a friend of mine. We do not see eye to eye on everything. So this is definitely a friendly debate. He's a PharmD. He's a really smart guy and just a really nice guy in general. I enjoyed this conversation. I enjoy who he is. He's a doctor of pharmacy, as I said. He's a cardiovascular research scientist. He's very well published. He's written over 250 publications in the medical literature. He's written 3 best-selling health books, The Salt Fix, Superfuel, The Longevity Solution. You can find him on Instagram at Dr. James DiNic. So DrJamesDinic. And so in this podcast, we talked about a lot of things. In the beginning, we talk about salt. After that, we end up getting into a discussion about magnesium, kidney function, BUN and creatinine, and then we get into vitamin C, which is one of the more fascinating concepts. So a couple of things I'll add as commentary to this. In this podcast, James mentioned that there is a hospital study in which people increased their vitamin C from 20 to around 60, and they saw improvements. Now, if you get my insider, which you can subscribe to on my website, which is carnivoremd.com, you will know that I posted an article this week showing that diabetics, people with insulin resistance, don't have the same levels of vitamin C in their mononuclear blood cells, meaning in their immune cells, as people who are insulin sensitive for any given set amount of vitamin C in the diet. What's so fascinating to me about this question with vitamin C is ultimately, can we get enough vitamin C to be optimal eating only animal foods? I absolutely think we can. And as I challenged James with in a friendly way in this podcast, the interventional studies with vitamin C generally have failed to show any benefit, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, etc. And I think that what is interesting about the study that he's mentioning is that if people are in the hospital, they're inflamed, they likely have insulin resistance. And in those people, maybe a little bit more vitamin C from 20 to 60 is beneficial, but I'm not convinced. And in my previous issue of The Insider from 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I showed an article that said with an increase from 70 to 270 milligrams a day of vitamin C, there was no change in oxidative stress or inflammatory markers. So I'm not convinced we need megadoses of vitamin C. Chris Masterjohn and I disagree on this as well, but I'm just not convinced there's really good evidence that anything above maybe 30 to 70 milligrams a day, which is easily obtainable from animal foods, is optimal for a human. As James and I talk about, potentially more, especially in the form of supplements, might even be dangerous. We know that vitamin C can turn into oxalate. Anyone who's listening to this podcast probably knows all about oxalate and how we maybe don't want a whole bunch of that. Anyway, the other thing that comes up in this podcast is cadmium in kidneys. And I know you guys are familiar with white oak. I'm going to tell you all about white oak chellah in a moment, but white oak is so cool that they had their kidney and liver tested for cadmium, and the levels were pretty darn low. In fact, they were much lower than what we usually find in seafood, especially shellfish. So I'm not worried about cadmium in kidneys from farms like White Oak, Belcampo, who's going to be a sponsor starting next week. We've tested the kidney, we've tested the liver from White Oak. It doesn't have high levels of lead or mercury or cadmium. The kidneys don't have excessive levels of lead or mercury or cadmium. They are much lower than what we usually find in even shellfish. Shellfish has more cadmium, significantly more cadmium than the liver from White Oak, so I don't have to worry about this. But it was very interesting that James brought this up and the idea that kidneys can accumulate cadmium. So anyway, with that in mind, you will really enjoy this podcast with James, and you will also really enjoy White Oak Chellah. You guys know my deep, heartfelt love for White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia. Last year, we did a party there. We called it White Oak Chellah. It's my cheesy name. If you don't like it, blame me. It was kind of like Coachella for those of you who are young and you know that Coachella. Anyway, White Oak Chellah. It was amazing. Like 90 people came. I gave a talk. I did a AMA podcast live there that I'm going to post soon on my podcast. We had barbecues, we had open pit fires, we got to see the farm, we got to talk to Will and Jenny who own the farm and run it, see the animals, and just really see how well they tend the land. It was incredible. This year, it's going to be bigger and better. Dr. Mercola is going to come. It's going to be fantastic. So if you go to my Instagram, link in the bio for White Oak Chellah, or you can go to White Oak Pastures, www.whiteoakpastures.com. There's a link under events for White Oak Chellah. It's out there. It's going to be amazing, and we're just all going to celebrate the beauty that is regenerative agriculture, which is amazing, and it's something I'm so fired up about. And I love White Oak. As you know, they are 6th generation, 150 years in the family. They have been doing regenerative agriculture there for 20 plus years, which means rotational grazing of cattle, putting compost back into the soil. The soil there is so brown. It has so much organic matter. It's incredible. And you'll hear me talking about this much more, but there's no spraying of pesticides. The cows don't get B12, James Wilkes, and darn it, if the meat isn't delicious, it is such clean meat. It is amazing. It's grass-fed, grass-finished to the nines, and they have pork. Iberico pork is amazing. They have lamb, chickens, guinea. It's all so carefully, considerately raised. Check out whiteoakpastures.com. You can use the code CarnivoreMD for 10% off your first order, or you can go to info.whiteoakpastures.com and use Carnivore 15 for the items that are on special there. I believe we've got New York steaks on special this week, so check those out at info.whiteoakpastures.com/CarnivoreMD. That is my fan page at White Oak. So check that stuff out, guys, and I hope to see you all at White Oak Chellah 2020. It'll be amazing. Again, there's a link in my bio on Instagram. There's a link through the website. If you have questions, you can just give them a call. They're awesome people with amazing Southern accents. My other people with amazing Southern accents, maybe not as many Southern accents, are the boys and girls, the men and women at Ancestral Supplements. These people are living it, you guys. You should follow them on Instagram at Ancestral Supplements and see a picture there of Brian, who owns the company and is the mastermind behind this whole thing, and his wife, and they are ripped. They jump in the cold water behind their house all the time. They are living the ancestral lifestyle, and they, just like me, believe in eating nose to tail. And how do we do that? We eat organs from the animal, and they are sourcing fantastic grass-fed, grass-finished organs of all shapes and sizes from New Zealand and encapsulating them into gelatin. It makes it so easy to eat because you don't have to struggle with liver or kidney taste or thymus taste or brain taste, any of that stuff. It's a great adjunct to your diet. I really think getting the organs is important. If you can get them fresh, that's fantastic. If you're traveling or you want to start with the pills or you want to use the pills for organs that you can't get normally, do that. They have brain, heart, liver, kidney, eye. So what am I excited about right now? I'm excited about their tallow. They have fat. They have grass-fed animal fat in capsules. Lots of people always ask me, how do I get enough fat? This is a great option, and it pairs really well with the other supplements there because it increases the solubility of the fat-soluble vitamins. If you follow me on Instagram, you will also know that I posted an amazing sort of improvement in a woman with some significant histamine reaction on her face that improved overnight with a kidney supplement from Ancestral Supplements. The kidney supplement has DAO, diamine oxidase, which can be helpful for those suffering with histamine issues. So check out the kidney supplement for sure as well. Please support them. They are good people doing good work. You can use the code SALADINOMD at their Shopify site for 10% off. All right, you guys, that is all for today. Enjoy this podcast with my buddy, James DiNicolantonio. I so appreciate the friendly debates. I'm learning a lot. I think he's learning a lot. We're sharing ideas. We're moving it forward. We just want people to understand the truth and be healthy and kick butt and be radical. So enjoy this podcast. I will see you after for what is going on with me. James, welcome to the podcast, my friend. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. It's been a long time coming. I think that this will be a good conversation for people. I know that we both enjoy meat, and I like to not make this podcast an echo chamber. So there will probably be some things that we disagree on, and hopefully we can just provide different sides of that issue to people and kind of have a cool discourse about it. But I think a lot of people are curious about electrolytes, and you've written the book, The Salt Fix. Let's just talk about this a little bit and think about how they all come together here for humans. The context of this discussion for me is the very real possibility of humans not getting enough sodium if they limit salt. And I think that's something that you have preached. You've beat the drum for that in the past. Yeah. I think that the other side of the equation that I often wonder about is, and this is just conjecture, but how much salt did we have evolutionarily, So how do we kind of navigate this, and are there dangers to getting too much salt?
Right. That's a good question. So basically the whole idea that we didn't eat a lot of salt during evolutionary times was from a very famous New England Journal of Medicine publication. I believe it was published in the 1970s by two co-authors. And what they looked at was strictly land vegetation that was consumed and basically muscle meats. They never took into account aquatic vegetation that may have been consumed, which is, has sodium levels 10 times higher than land vegetation. But also they didn't look at consuming the entire animal nose to tail. So they didn't look at salty blood. They didn't look at interstitial fluid salt intake, and they didn't look at organ intake. And organs do contain more salt than muscle meat itself. Obviously we're extremely salty, human beings and animals. Their blood contains, and we contain about 3,200 milligrams of sodium per liter. Right. Our kidneys filter like a full teaspoon of salt every 5 minutes. So we're basically like walking oceans in a way. We're like these, basically we took this oceanic, mineral water with us when we basically, came from the ocean to land. And so any animal that would have been consumed, we would have consumed all the salt in that animal. Now, humans aren't stupid. We would do the same thing animals would do. We would go to salt licks. So we would follow animal trails to salt licks and consume straight salt. We would even drink brackish and salt water as well if we were deficient in salt. And that New England Journal of Medicine paper never took into account the fact that we were smart enough, just like animals are smart enough, to seek out sources of salt. So we could have easily gotten a normal sodium intake of 4,000 milligrams per day. Evolutionary. Of sodium. Yep.
Right. Not sodium chloride. Because this conversation always gets confusing. Sodium chloride is going to be double that amount or even a little more than that, right? Because of the chloride moiety in the salt molecule.
Right. Yep.
Okay. So I guess that's kind of the big question there is, what do you think an evolutionarily consistent intake of sodium is for humans? How much salt do we really need?
Right. And I think today's conversation is different than, 10,000 years ago, because most of us are on salt depleting diuretics. So basically any type of caffeine is going to cause not just water loss in the urine, but massive amounts of sodium and even more chloride loss. So basically 4 cups of coffee will cause you to lose an extra half a teaspoon of salt. And exercise, on average, we lose about a half a teaspoon of salt per hour of exercise. So how much salt we need or you need completely depends on not only lifestyle factors, but also genetics as well.
Okay. And so what if we're going to ballpark it for people? So the studies that I've seen are quite fascinating. On the low end, in some of these salt studies, when they restrict sodium down to very low levels, like 500 milligrams of sodium per day, they see insulin resistance develop, right? So there's a great paper on this called Low Salt Diet and Insulin Resistance. that has a sort of a compendium of all the trials that this author was aware of, looking at salt levels or sodium levels and response in the body. And they looked at insulin resistance, probably measures of fasting insulin. I got to look and see how they measured insulin resistance in detail, but there's a number of RCTs. And when they go down to less than like 500 milligrams of sodium per day, they clearly get an increase in insulin resistance as the body is probably turning up all of the systems to conserve that sodium. It's making itself insulin resistant. And certainly in addition to insulin, the mineralocorticoids are going to be bumping as well in that situation. But in some of the studies, when they would go higher, once they would go above 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams, there didn't seem to be as clear a picture regarding insulin resistance. So I think it's kind of this interesting question, where is the cutoff for humans in terms of salt consumption? What is the minimum that we need? It's probably at least 500 or 1,000 milligrams a day, which, as you suggest, is probably something that we would have gotten from blood and fresher meat Yep. But the question that I've always had is, if we get too much sodium, can we be depleting other things? And as you've talked about, many of the other minerals, the retention of the other minerals, potassium and magnesium specifically, is kind of sodium dependent. So if we go below what we need, we'll lose potassium and magnesium. But if we go too high, there is a sodium potassium exchanging, pump in the distal convoluted tubule. It's like, what do you think about that? Can we go too high and then have imbalances of minerals on that side?
So first, I would say if you look at the prospective studies, going too low is much worse than going too high, because for most people with normal kidney function, you'll just pee out what you don't need. Right. Whereas salt is an essential mineral, we can't make it. So having enough, we can't make up for not getting enough. So always better to shoot higher than lower in most cases. That being said too, salt never, in most cases, doesn't seem to be the actual issue. And in the salt fix, I kind of cover the main reasons why. But if your potassium intake is 3 to 5 grams per day, sodium doesn't seem to be an issue at a normal sodium intake of 4,000 or 5,000 milligrams. But it is important to have 3, 4, 5 grams of potassium per day if you're going to be eating 3, 4, 5 grams of sodium. That is important.
So we probably want to balance sodium and potassium to some level.
For sure.
And that's an interesting thing, that if those get terribly out of balance, it's probably an issue. Now, many people listening to this will know that meat is actually a really good source of potassium, because potassium is intracellular generally, and sodium is mostly extracellular. So as you're suggesting, in a whole animal, the majority of the sodium is in the interstitial fluid in the blood rather than in the muscle. But there's a lot of potassium in muscle. And so a human could get 3 grams or 3,000 milligrams of potassium just by eating 2 pounds of muscle meat a day. Now, for some people, 2 pounds of muscle meat might sound like an astronomical amount, but for those on meat heavy diets or carnivore diets, it's easily within the realm of possibility to get that much from potassium. So I do think it's interesting to think about how we balance potassium and sodium and the sources of potassium, because if you look, the potassium sources are less common than I expect. Even within the plant kingdom, there's some potassium, but it's not abundant. Getting 5,000 milligrams of potassium per day is not as easy as I thought when I looked at the actual all across all foods, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think we still need to, look at when you cook meat, some of the potassium may come out in the liquids. So it's generally, you want to balance like cooking meat like in the oven and versus like cooking meat in a crock pot and making people drink the juices. That is important. But yeah, part of the reason why I consume tubers and beans is because they're so freaking high in potassium. Mm-hmm. Like one medium potato gives me a full gram of potassium, and I'm insulin sensitive. I don't have any issue consuming undercooked organic, tubers. Mm-hmm. But you're right. Like you get, I think is it 3.5 ounces of meat? You get like, I can't remember, but like 2 pounds of meat is going to give you 2,800 milligrams of potassium.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
A lot of potassium in meat, And the tubers are probably the only place that I've seen where there's really any amount of potassium in the plant kingdom. People can kind of look this up, but it's more rare than people would believe. And so my impression, and I was talking to Chris Masterjohn about this a few weeks ago, is that if someone is normotensive, if they don't have high blood pressure, trying to think about the sodium to potassium balance is probably reasonable. One of the things I've anecdotally noted in my own life is that as I've gone further down this sort of carnivore rabbit hole, I don't feel like I need quite as much sodium. I'm by no means restricting sodium,
Right.
but I'm wondering if some, if we're getting like, there are some people doing ketogenic diets who are doing 2 teaspoons a day. And like, coffee could change this, other things could change this, but nobody is going to get, 2 teaspoons of salt per day is only going to be 5 grams of sodium or so. But, it's pretty hard to get 5,000 to 6,000 milligrams of potassium in a day. And I think that my sense is we want to aim for about 1-to-1 potassium to sodium and just think like, well, if I'm getting 3,000 milligrams or 3,500 milligrams of potassium per day, I should just think about where my sodium is coming from and maybe not overdo the sodium.
Yep.
Who knows? It's kind of interesting.
Exactly. There's been studies that show as long as you're getting 4 grams of potassium, 4 grams of sodium is perfect. That's what I aim for, about a 4 gram potassium, 4 gram sodium ratio. That 1-to-1 seems to work well for me.
Like a 1-to-1. And I think people could probably adjust that down. And within the community, there are a lot of people who are experimenting and feel like they're doing pretty good with lower amounts of sodium. I don't think we necessarily need, I don't think we know how much sodium we need, but I don't want to go, I'm never going to go under 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day. But I think there definitely are people in the community who can do probably fine with 1,500 milligrams of sodium, but we're still learning about this. And then,
our body controls its intake like water. You wouldn't tell somebody how much water they need. They know how much water they need from their thirst. We have the same type of system in our brains for salt. And so if you are craving salt, don't be stupid, eat salt and it'll go down. If you overconsume it, you won't crave it later on in the day.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're right about that. And then magnesium is the last electrolyte. Like this one is just confusing. Yeah. If you look at the plant sources of magnesium, these are really not that heavy. I mean, my best hypothesis is that humans were probably getting magnesium from water, things like spring water. Drinking 2 to 3 liters of spring water a day can give you hundreds of milligrams of magnesium. There's not a ton of magnesium in muscle meat. There's a decent amount of magnesium in muscle meat. There's not a lot of magnesium in plants. There's some, but then we can talk about how bioavailable it is. But where do you think we would have gotten magnesium from evolutionarily? Am I thinking about, do you think that, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, we definitely would have gotten magnesium through eating nose to tail, animals and also plants. There are definitely good sources of magnesium from certain plant foods, for sure. Typically plants generally contain about 3 times more magnesium per gram weight versus animal foods. They are about 33% less bioavailable, but you're still getting, if you think about it, if it's 3 times more concentrated, but a 33% less bioavailable, you're still getting twice the amount of magnesium in certain plant foods than animal foods. So I want us to be a little careful. Yes, it's true, the bioavailability issue. But when it's so much more concentrated, the overall amount is what really matters anyway. So it's something me and you probably slightly disagree on, but right. I think what's really interesting with the salt magnesium interaction and interplay is they've done low sodium studies in people, and it actually induces magnesium deficiency.
Sure.
And what ends up happening is, in order for the body to maintain normal sodium levels on a low salt diet, it'll start pulling sodium from the bone, but it also pulls magnesium and calcium at the same time.
Sure.
And that will spike magnesium blood levels, and it tricks the body into thinking you're overloaded in magnesium when you're not getting enough salt. It'll start kicking magnesium out in the urine. And same thing happens when you go on a low salt diet. Aldosterone levels go up, sure. And aldosterone also kicks magnesium out. So low salt diets can absolutely lead to magnesium deficiency, and magnesium deficiency is what causes low potassium in most people. Most people, like doctors, they supplement people with potassium supplements for thiazide diuretics. It's because it's causing magnesium deficiency and your body can't hold on to potassium. So magnesium and salt driving magnesium is very important for us to be even able to hold on to the potassium that we have in our bodies.
And the magnesium. And so in those studies in which they are low salt, how low was the sodium? At what point?
It wasn't even that low. They were giving 2,200 milligrams of sodium. The people were exercising an hour a day, but 2,200 milligrams of sodium is not necessarily super low. Like the American Heart Association tells everyone to go less than 1,500 milligrams.
Yeah, yeah.
So consuming basically a full teaspoon of salt, which is 2,300 milligrams of sodium, if you're exercising an hour a day, led to negative magnesium balance due to negative sodium balance.
But what's interesting here is the insulin sensitivity piece, right? And I've got to wonder how insulin sensitive those people were. And this is the dangerous part or the tricky part of nutritional studies, because I've seen similar studies in young women where they gave 2,200 milligrams. Maybe it was the same study. And they had, I think they had low urinary sodium, suggesting that they were conserving all the sodium, and they had increased plasma aldosterone. And you think, 2,200 milligrams of sodium should be enough. And there are other studies that show that it's okay. I wonder if, I've got a sense that if people are insulin resistant, that they're going to need more sodium, right? Well, this makes sense. I mean, insulin is part of the conservation mechanism. So kind of coming back to it, I think that it's hard to put a number on how much sodium we're going to need, because it's all within the context of insulin sensitivity and insulin signaling at the level of the kidney to conserve the sodium. So tricky stuff.
I mean, the other thing too is your body's really smart. If you're not getting enough sodium, what happens is you start losing 10 times the amount of magnesium in your sweat. And so that's how low salt diets can lead to magnesium deficiency as well. And in regards to, I know you really want to know, like, what is the more optimal amount of sodium to maximize insulin sensitivity. There was a publication in type 2 diabetics from Ames in 2004. It compared 3,000 milligrams of sodium to 6,000 milligrams of sodium. The 6,000 milligram sodium intake significantly improved like insulin AUC and oral glucose tolerance tests. So that study would suggest that higher amounts of sodium in the 6,000 milligram range is
high though.
It is high. It's better than 3,000. Some of those diabetics were on thiazide diuretic medication.
So these were diabetics. So this is the thing, is it's in diabetics. Yeah. So this is exactly what I'm saying, that in insulin resistant individuals, they're just going to waste sodium like crazy. But I think that those of us that are insulin sensitive probably can need much less sodium.
Potentially, depends on our lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that the ultimate arbiter or the ultimate determiner here would be to work with a physician to get plasma renin, plasma aldosterone, to look at sodium in the urine, to look at magnesium in the urine. You could even look at magnesium sweat levels. I mean, these are all kind of esoteric blood work, but I think it would be interesting. I definitely want to get, I mean, plasma renin aldosterone ratio is pretty tricky to do because you have to be like supine, and it's just a tricky thing. But just to give some indication of whether electrolyte or at least sodium balance is adequate would be kind of fascinating there. And you can look in the urine to see what the urinary sodium levels are, and you can tell if somebody's like really, really holding on to all the sodium. You know, if the urinary sodium is less than 20, like, man, they're holding on to everything they need more.
For sure.
As opposed to the urinary sodium, it's above 150, they're getting tons and they're just getting rid of it.
You can even look at blood urea nitrogen as long as water intake is normal. Not getting enough salt will cause, plasma volume contraction, and you won't get good blood flow to the kidneys, and BUN will elevate. So if you go to your doctor, you have an elevated BUN on a normal water intake, that generally indicates not getting enough salt.
That's interesting. And so that would be above the reference range, like 20, 22 or 15. I mean, where would you draw the line?
Yeah, probably definitely above 20.
Yeah. And I think that I've gotten that question from people before, because they'll say a lot of times when people go carnivore, they'll see the BUN bump. And I wonder if that's like, salt wasting, and, or it could be protein, it could be urea, it could be all kinds of things. And I think that it's an interesting measure to keep track of. People listening will know that in the past I've talked about, if the BUN bumps on a carnivore diet, doesn't necessarily mean that your kidneys are not working well. I think sometimes people go to their doctor and the doctors freak out and go, you've got a BUN at 23. This carnivore diet isn't working for you. It's hurting your kidneys. Or they see a creatinine bump as well. And neither of those, I think, is specific enough to really tell us what's going on. But like you're saying, a bumped BUN could even be inadequate sodium. Could be an indication of a low fluid volume, or a bumped creatinine could just be from the extra breakdown of creatine in the muscle meat. And people should get a cystatin C to check that.
Yep.
So, okay, cool. So the electrolytes are interesting. And I've heard you talk about this before, and then we'll move on to vitamin C. There's no great way to check these in the blood, is there? You can do serum sodium and serum potassium. Those are pretty lousy measures of total body storage. You can do red blood cell potassium and red blood cell magnesium. Those are not great, maybe a little better. It seems like the best way to know is to do a magnesium challenge, which involves a 24-hour urine collection. And there's no better way to really know about our body stores of this, is there?
Well, Ken Berry he put out a tweet like, hey, are there some better tests? And there are. You just basically bump up the reference range on serum levels and then look at 24-hour urinary magnesium. If urinary magnesium is like less than 80 milligrams on a normal magnesium intake, and you're even in the normal range, but you're on the low normal end of the range, that's very highly suggestive of magnesium deficiency. I don't know who does mononuclear blood cell magnesium. That's the only test I know of that has been validated against IV magnesium load tests to match. So it is a simple blood test, but I think it's more of like a research lab type of order, but that works really well. And then of course you can do oral magnesium challenges because magnesium, you're supposed to, see about a third of the oral magnesium come out in the urine. So if you consume 300 milligrams of magnesium, 100 should come out in a 24-hour urinalysis. If less than that's coming out, you either have GI issues and you're not absorbing it well, or you're holding onto it and you're deficient.
So, and those are just so hard to do those tests, who's going to get a 24-hour urine for magnesium? I think we should probably do more of it because, people are always wondering, do I need more magnesium if I'm having cramps? It's not impossible to do the 24-hour urine for
That's
magnesium.
Why challenge Josh, just to start eating more magnesium and see if it helps. That's really probably the best way.
Yeah. I guess that is probably the way to do it. And what's funny is that it seems to be about 50-50. For some people it helps, for other people it doesn't. I've heard for some people it worsens things, and then you're like, oh man, the electrolytes just get so complex. And it makes me think that maybe the answer is we just all need to drink blood, or we're just not eating fresh enough meat or something,
It very well could be,
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's talk about vitamin C. I think we're going to differ in opinion here, but we can just lay it out for people and talk about the differing sides of this equation. But why don't you tell us your perspective on vitamin C? I know you've posted a lot about sort of levels and neutrophils and peripheral blood cells, and let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think debate is very important. I don't care. I'm not a part of a certain I'm not vegan. I'm not plant-based. I just want to get to the bottom of what is the healthiest diet. So I'm happy to be proven wrong, to be honest.
Yeah.
So let me just kind of go over vitamin C for people who don't really understand a lot about vitamin C. But basically, it is an essential nutrient. Most animals make it, humans don't. We lost the ability to make vitamin C about 25 million years ago. Guinea pigs lost it about 60 million years ago. We don't know why we lost the ability. Some people think it might have been due to a virus that changed our genome. There's some other theories of UV radiation that might have affected the genetic coding for the last enzyme that converts glucose to vitamin C. We're not really sure why. But what is interesting, and so it doesn't appear like I look biased, every single animal that including humans that can't make their own vitamin C seem to be a little bit better at recycling vitamin C. They actually have GLUT1 transporters on red blood cells that'll take up oxidized vitamin C and recycle it. Animals that make their own vitamin C can't do that. So that's interesting that, every single animal that's been tested that can't make their own vitamin C has this ability to recycle oxidized vitamin C in the red blood cell. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That would be dehydroascorbic acid.
Dehydroascorbic acid, correct, DHA.
Yeah.
But here's the reasons why I think we need more vitamin C than the amounts to prevent scurvy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at animals that can't make their own vitamin C, like guinea pigs, the amount to bring back general health is 10 times higher than the amount to prevent scurvy. So if we were to extrapolate that to other animals that don't make their own vitamin C, 10 milligrams prevents scurvy, 10 times that would be 100 milligrams to bring back general health. If you look at restriction studies, actually giving low doses of vitamin C for months, either in a hospital setting or clinical ward settings, when humans consume 23 milligrams of vitamin C, they have a higher rate of gingivitis versus 78 milligrams. So from those studies, it seems clear to me that if you want a lower risk of gingivitis, 78 seems to be better than 23. again, these aren't in people consuming carnivore diets, so we can't 100% say a carnivore needs 78 versus 23. Again, I'm not trying to be biased here.
Right. Or ketogenic diets. And yeah,
Correct.
I mean, and there's not a whole lot of gingivitis in the carnivore community, though. If people, we could use it as an endpoint. Yeah.
If you look at your actual gums, what ends up happening, there's stages of gingivitis. So like the nice peaks that you'll see will start rounding out more. You'll start getting a receded gum line. You don't necessarily have to see bleeding gums. So you can, I'm not telling people to check their own gums. They're not doctors. But what I'm saying is those studies had pictures of the stages of gingivitis. Right. And so they weren't bleeding at 23 milligrams. They didn't have scurvy, but they had stage 1, 2, and 3 of gingivitis at higher prevalences than 78 milligrams.
Interesting.
There was another study too that looked at 5, 10, and 20 milligrams of vitamin C. And they didn't induce scurvy, but it did reduce glutathione levels by 50%, white blood cell, semen, and serum vitamin C levels were lowered by 50%, and delayed hypersensitivity, which is an in vivo test of immune function. They basically give you an antigen on your skin. That delayed hypersensitivity test was reduced at intakes of 5, 10, and 20, and was brought back to normal at 60 milligrams of vitamin C. At least the delayed hypersensitivity was brought back to normal at 60 milligrams. If we notch up further and look at other studies that have tested higher doses of vitamin C, we know that it requires 100 milligrams to saturate the white blood cells, but the heart, the kidneys, and the liver take longer to saturate than white blood cells, because white blood cells need a lot of vitamin C because they're secreting all these reactive oxygen species to kill off pathogens. And that's why they suck up vitamin C, to prevent the damage from all the, hydrogen peroxide, hydrochloric acid, I think it's hypochlorous acid that they secrete.
We don't actually know that. I mean, we could talk about that, but my impression is that evidence that vitamin C acts as an antioxidant in the human body are lacking radically. Like, I don't know that we are sure that white blood cells are sucking up vitamin C to do those antioxidant roles.
Well, that's a good point. Here's why I think it is an antioxidant. If you look at studies that give vitamin C, so there was one study, they gave 200 milligrams of vitamin C, 500 milligrams, 1,000 or 2,000. They looked at lipid hydroperoxides in young adults. Lipid hydroperoxides were significantly reduced at the 500, 1,000, and 2,000 dose versus the lower dose. And when they extracted their red blood cells, Heinz bodies, which are reactive oxygen species damage to those red blood cells, were dramatically increased on a lower vitamin C intake, and 500, 1,000, and 2,000 seemed to make the red blood cells more resilient to ex vivo damage. I think it's without question that vitamin C recycles vitamin E, and without question, vitamin E prevents oxidative stress in cell membranes. So to me, I 100%, I don't think it's a question that vitamin C is an antioxidant. That is just like biochemistry 101, physiology 101. And not only that, vitamin C has been shown to be a direct scavenger of superoxide anions, hydrogen peroxide. But the thing with vitamin C is glutathione recycles vitamin C, B vitamins and NAD help support glutathione, and vitamin C recycles vitamin E. So you can take all the vitamin C supplement you want. If you don't have good vitamin E status, you don't have good glutathione status, you don't have good B vitamin status, vitamin C is only going to give you halfway there. So I definitely think vitamin C is an antioxidant. Whether white blood cells use the vitamin C to be an antioxidant, we can't 100% for sure, but they absolutely do actively take up vitamin C. That is without question.
Sure, they're going to take up vitamin C. I think the question is, what is it doing? Is it the only thing that can serve that role? There are many hypotheses that perhaps uric acid can also serve that role, since the loss of the GULO enzyme 20 to 60 million years ago. There's a study in these swimmers in Berlin who swim in cold water, and they found that both uric acid and glutathione levels kind of drop. And so there's this hypothesis originally advanced by Bruce Ames that did uric acid take over some of the antioxidant role of vitamin C? And so there's a lot of subtlety in this conversation because I think the ultimate question is how much vitamin C is ideal for humans. And we my position is we don't really know, and I have not seen convincing evidence that we need huge doses of vitamin C. And there are some things that I've seen that suggest that large doses of vitamin C can be damaging to humans. One of the main questions that I would ask you about this is, how many people in the general population do you think are getting an ideal amount of vitamin C in their diet?
Well, I think first let's back up and try to figure out what an ideal vitamin C intake is. So if you look at animals that don't make their own vitamin C, like howler monkeys or spider monkeys, they're about 1/10 a human size. They consume about 700 milligrams of vitamin C. Gorillas, they consume about 5,000 milligrams of vitamin C. So if you look at that ratio, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that humans can consume a couple grams of vitamin C and not have side effects. And the tolerable upper limit is 2 grams. And the only reason why they set it at 2 grams is because some people get diarrhea from it. That's it. That was the main reason why. If you look at the studies, so anywhere from 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams from what I've looked at seems to be optimal in regards to reducing the risk of colds. In regards for type 2 diabetics, numerous studies have used 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, which have dramatically improved A1C, insulin sensitivity, blood pressure. I mean, vitamin C recycles tetrahydrobiopterin, which is the main cofactor in endothelial nitric oxide synthase. That is the main enzyme that forms nitric oxide. So vitamin C helps increase nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator and also an antiplatelet agent. So from clinical studies of, again, colds and insulin sensitivity and reducing lipid hydroperoxides, I personally have seen studies that indicate 500 to 1,000 milligrams per day seems to be optimal.
And how many people do you think are getting that?
Probably virtually no one.
Okay. So if we accept that, okay, so if we accept that, and okay, we can just back up a little bit, but let's just move through this point. I don't think that our human ancestors would have had access to 500 to 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C throughout evolution. That to me sounds like a real stretch. There's just not a whole lot of vitamin C available evolutionarily. And it seems like, this is a little bit of evolutionary conjecture. It seems like our species would not have existed if this mutation were so detrimental that we would have had lots of extra lipid peroxides, lots of extra DNA damage, lots of extra oxidative stress running around with our lower amounts of vitamin C intake. The Inuit are estimated to get 40 milligrams of vitamin C a day. Who knows what our ancestors got, but fruit is not available year round in the majority of the world. And certainly throughout most of Africa, we're not eating leaves all day. We're probably not getting a ton of vitamin C again, and we don't know for sure. But I do think it's interesting because I've heard you mention that perhaps the ideal would be 500 to 1,000. And then I think, okay, if that's the case, then why do so many interventional trials with vitamin C fail to show effect? Because if the majority of the population is not getting enough vitamin C, we would think that if we gave vitamin C, then we would see clear benefits. The majority of studies, in fact, I'm not aware of any really significant findings in terms of vitamin C interventions. I haven't seen the diabetes studies you're talking about, but there are many studies. There's 2012 meta-analysis of 40,000 patients with vitamin C, no effect on mortality. 2013 meta-analysis of 11,000 patients, no effect on the incidence of the common cold. 2007, this is Cook et al. The previous two were Bahalkovich et al. 2012 and Hamila et al. 2013. But Cook et al. 2007 is 8,000 people, RCT, no effect on cardiovascular events. 2008, Sesso et al. 14,000 people, RCT, no effect on cardiovascular events, and a meta-analysis of a large number of patients in 2012 on high blood pressure, which showed no change in blood pressure with vitamin C administration. Now, I do wonder if this is a little more complex than just giving someone ascorbic acid and whether food forms of vitamin C are different than the supplement, but all we've got is ascorbic acid. But I can't really wrap my head around this. And I find the evidence that higher doses of vitamin C are needed or beneficial kind of underwhelming when we see multiple trials like this that are interventional trials showing no benefit. There's plenty of epidemiology that says, hey, if you have more vitamin C in your blood, you do better. But as we know, that could be a lot of healthy user bias. And when it's not replicated by the interventional trials, I mean, if nobody in the population is getting 500 to 1,000 milligrams, which I don't think they are, because I think that a fraction of the population is supplementing. You know, no one is really supplementing for better or for worse. We don't really know, right? But if we really needed this much vitamin C, number one, how would our ancestors have made it, right? We would have had just rampant oxidation. The Inuit would have just had tons of oxidative stress and tons of lipid peroxides. And then wouldn't we see benefit more clearly in these interventional trials? To me, there's just a missing piece of this equation. And I think, I think that I know that humans need some vitamin C. And again, this is just my perspective, but the more evolutionarily consistent story seems to be that we could easily get as much as we need, right? That it was present in meat, that, doses of who knows how much we were getting. I mean, apparently there's 15 milligrams of vitamin C in a pound of meat. So I don't think it's unreasonable that humans would have gotten 20 to 40 milligrams of vitamin C a day, but evolutionarily, it seems like it would have been something that would have been readily available, or else the mutation would, we would have perhaps evolved the ability to make it again, or evolved, or that group of people, the first time there was a polymorphism in one of our ancestors and they can make vitamin C, they would have outcompeted everybody, right? And it would have come back into the population. It just seems kind of hard for me to believe that we would have needed 500 to 1,000 milligrams to be ideal. Again, it's conjecture. The other thing I'll add is that we don't really have a great test for this that I'm aware of. I mean, I can test glutathione levels in myself. I can test lipid peroxides in myself and my clients. And what I've seen in my own practice is they're not elevated in carnivores, who are not supplementing with vitamin C. So there seems to be a little discordance. Again, this is anecdotal work from my practice. There hasn't been a case series yet, and we don't have a clear study here, but I haven't seen elevating lipid peroxides. I haven't seen drops in glutathione. Chris Masterjohn and I kind of have this running debate about whether a ketogenic diet is going to increase or decrease glutathione, but I definitely don't see glutathione tank. I don't see 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine tank. I'm trying to think if there are other measures I should be looking at. Maybe I could do malondialdehyde or a T-bars test, but I don't supplement with vitamin C right now. Clearly, I don't have scurvy. My wounds heal just fine, and I get a lot of wounds these days. But the whole thing, I'm just kind of trying to piece it all together. And I see the data that says, yeah, the white blood cells take it up and they saturate, but I don't see the clinical correlates, and the interventional studies just don't add up for me. And I think now the other sort of asterisk for the whole conversation is if people want to take some vitamin C, that's fine. We can talk about the downsides of vitamin C or some of my concerns about excess vitamin C. But I think it's a fun conversation because it's like, well, if humans aren't meant to be carnivores, or if a carnivore diet isn't going to be good for people, then we should be supplementing vitamin C when we're on a carnivore diet. Or maybe it sort of says, well, maybe we were always getting vitamin C from somewhere else. But it's actually become something I think about a lot. It's kind of a fascinating topic in the whole space.
Well, let me help you out. Let me respond to that.
Yeah.
So we always got to remember food is a huge, complex, multifaceted, molecule of tons of vitamins, minerals, cofactors versus just vitamin C as a supplement. There are definitely studies that don't find benefit, but then there are studies that do. There was about a 2,000 patient randomized controlled trial in patients infected with H. pylori. And what they did is they tried to match supplements with food. So they gave selenium to boost glutathione. They gave vitamin C at 250 milligrams twice a day. And they gave vitamin E, again, because those three kind of recycle each other.
Sure. Yeah.
There was a significant reduction in gastric cancer mortality and gastric cancer incidence. Mm-hmm. And about 50% of the population is affected with H. pylori. So that was pretty big. When you add a few more antioxidants, remember I was saying how just doing vitamin C isn't going to do you any benefit if vitamin E is tanked and glutathione's tanked. You need both. You need all three. And then certainly food bringing vitamin C would have brought in a ton of other things that would definitely probably show much more benefit than just vitamin C supplements. Right. Food form is definitely the way I go. I take vitamin C either through camu or organic kiwis. But let's talk about like when we lost the ability to produce it, which was 25 million years ago in Africa. We would have had a ton of access to vitamin C foods. Also, the best paper I've ever seen on the Inuit. It's literally, I think it's titled "Vitamin C in the Inuit: Past and Present." It was a professor out of Canada. And she said that the Inuit on average would have gotten around 100 milligrams of vitamin C. And if they were to kill a whale, a 50,000 pound whale, they would eat the skin of the whale, and sure. It would last 25 Inuit and 50 dogs when they killed a whale for 8 months. And if they were eating the skin, they would easily get 350 milligrams of vitamin C because they would consume narwhal and, I forget the other whale, beluga whale skin. And the Inuit actually did have vitamin C year round, because what they would do is they would freeze the plants and the berries for winter, and they would store the berries in seal fat. And they would also harvest, and I have quotes from papers, in the dead of winter, they would harvest kelp and seaweed at low tide and use it for vitamin C. So even Inuits in the Arctic had vitamin C year round because they were living in a freezer box and they could store berries and plants, and they weren't stupid, and they did do that.
Right. I mean, I guess it's just this anthropologic conjecture. How much were they getting? Yeah.
It is. Here's the thing too, when we look at bones of our ancestors, 42% had at least one clinical indicator of scurvy. So it goes to show you, yeah, you can live on low amounts of vitamin C, but when we look at the bones of our ancestors, they, like, more than a third had scurvy.
What time period was that from?
That was about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago.
So that's the advent of the agricultural revolution. I mean, that's the time of the Neolithic revolution.
It was a population that was primarily consuming, they said, oceanic marine meat, and they also started adding in some plant matter as well later on, like 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. But they were primarily consuming, they said, oceanic, like animal foods.
Where was this? What population was this?
It was in Peru.
It's strange. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if the Inuit were harvesting kelp and stuff for seaweed, but this population was just getting fish, and they weren't getting enough vitamin C. There's this, that's strange. 10 to 12,000 years ago is when the agricultural revolution started. That's when the Neolithic revolution started. And if you look at places like the Dixon Mounds, you can see clear decline in our health as we went from hunting and gathering to agriculture. So that's interesting to think about a population like that was still.
The study didn't say that they were, like, an agricultural type of society.
Maybe you can send me that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Because I mean, I think if you're eating, like you're suggesting, I mean, some of the foods from the ocean should give them a decent amount of vitamin C.
Here's the thing too. I mean, carnivores can get a ton of vitamin C. We just don't eat like we used to, nose to tail. So the problem is if you look at any carnivore, they go for the organs first.
Sure.
And muscle meat is absolute last. So the typical organ is going to contain 20 to 30 milligrams of vitamin C per 3.5 ounces.
Right.
So you can get a ton of vitamin C eating organs, but most carnivores aren't eating 50% of their diet as organs, probably like we used to. They're eating probably maybe 10% of their diet as organs.
Yeah. I've talked about this with Chris Masterjohn, that, there is 20 to 30 milligrams of vitamin C per 3 ounces of kidney and 3 ounces of liver. And then if you put in
Here's what's really cool. When animals are stressed or exercising, they can produce up to the human equivalent of 100 grams of vitamin C. So imagine us like chasing a woolly mammoth, stressed out of its mind, just jacked up on vitamin C. Imagine how much vitamin C we would potentially get in the blood and in the organs now that this animal is just jacked up, producing 10 times the amount of vitamin C because it's stressed the hell out. So I wonder how eating fresh and stressed animal meats could have been higher in vitamin C. It's really cool to think about. And interstitial fluid is 10 times higher in vitamin C. Urine is 4 times higher in vitamin C than blood. So, like, I mean, who knows, eating true nose to tail in the fluids, how much vitamin C we were getting as a carnivore. And now that we're only eating like muscle meats and lean organ meats, that doesn't equal nose to tail carnivore. I'm sorry, it doesn't.
It's hard to reproduce. I agree. Yeah. I talked about this with Rob Wolf. Yeah, I think that the changes that can happen in the meat, or at least the way that the blood is drained out of it, is pretty tricky to recreate. I mean, it's hard to get blood these days,
Yeah.
and we're not eating fresh animals. The evolutionarily, what I think about is that we lost this ability to make vitamin C. I've seen further back than 25 million, but say 25 million years ago. And if our ancestors were eating, if our primate ancestors were eating lots of vegetation, then they certainly would have had sources in plant matter. But I wonder about that transition. 6 million years ago, I did a podcast with Bill von Hippel recently, and we talked a lot about this transition out of the trees and into the savanna, into the sort of eastern Rift Valley, into these open spaces. And it's like, I think we would have gone away from sources of vitamin C, I guess, because I wonder where we would have been getting it. I mean, it's not that common.
Too. We had just this complete access to skulls of animals. Only hyenas can access the skull. They're the only animal in the savannah that had strong enough jaws to crack open a skull.
Right.
Brain contains about 20 milligrams of vitamin C, maybe 18 per 3.5 ounces, and cerebral spinal fluid contains about 40 milligrams per liter. Now, cerebral spinal fluid, there's in a ton, but if we were just constantly scavenging all these skulls because no other animal had access to it, and we were also drinking the cerebral spinal fluid and the fluid in the eyes, who knows how much vitamin C we were getting.
Yeah, I think that my sense was like you're suggesting, there would have been sources around, whether they were animals or plants. Yeah. There would have been some sources around for us to get, or we probably wouldn't be here. But I do wonder, where the optimal level is for people. And I think about this a lot. And I definitely, when I wonder, when I can get thymus, I'm like, oh, thymus is a really good source. It's hard for me to get brain, but yeah. And so I think we have to
even higher. Thymus is like 40 milligrams per 3.5 ounces of vitamin C.
Yeah, so thymus is a lot. Yeah,
thymus is a lot.
And when I talked to Chris Masterjohn, I noted that when I had my vitamin C level checked a few months ago on a carnivore diet, it was low normal, but it was within normal. I think it was 80 or something, and so it was like, it was.
Here's the thing too, is the lymphatic tissue is super saturated in vitamin C because our white blood cells concentrate it. So like lymphoid tissue that we used to eat as a true carnivore is very high in vitamin C. Lung is pretty high, like about similar to the thymus as well. Mm-hmm. Kidneys have good amounts of vitamin C. So like a true nose-to-tail carnivore, I could easily get 150, 250 milligrams of vitamin C.
Yeah, and if we're eating the skin or something, it could be
even more.
Yeah. And then how it's not. Vitamin C is pretty labile, right? So it's heat labile, it's storage. I mean, it's going to degrade.
Yeah.
How much does it degrade when we store things, I wonder?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it does take several months, but it can degrade about 70%. Mm-hmm. It doesn't degrade as much in animals, though. That's for sure.
I've seen that as well, that it's more stable in animal foods.
For sure. And, we would consume animal foods always fresh and then maybe out to 2 weeks. Whereas nowadays, like the store-bought meat, it's been hung for at least 2 weeks. So there is a difference there. Evolutionarily, we were consuming fresher meat, which is we can get into why I think sort of eating meat might not be as healthy as it used to be. I still eat meat. I eat probably 50% per weight a day as animal foods, and half my other foods come from plant food sources.
Right. No, I think it's interesting. Yeah. I do wonder about the 10-to-1 ratio that you mentioned earlier, because I guess we don't really know what the scurvy preventive dose is. That one study, the studies from the 1930s and 1940s with the conscientious objectors used 10 milligrams as the lowest dose. I've never seen a study, and there probably never will be one done with like 5 milligrams or something. So I wonder. I mean, it seems like maybe, I don't know. I don't think we know how much we should be getting. I wish there were a better test. I mean, you can test blood levels of vitamin C. It's not a great proxy. We can't really test. We can test glutathione. We can test lipid peroxides. We can test 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine. If people want to supplement, they can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, the thing too, here's some other reasons why I think at least 200 milligrams of vitamin C might be optimal, is because in order to hit the Vmax for the sodium dependent vitamin C transporter, where you're able to get vitamin C into the cell at a maximal rate, you need a blood level over 70 micromolar, which requires at a minimum 200 milligrams. For the majority of the population, you have to hit about 500 milligrams to hit that amount. And there's a sigmoidal curve for vitamin C, and you don't want to be on the steep part of the curve, because that means tissues are really sucking up that vitamin C. You want to be on this part of the curve, and you don't start turning the cusp until you hit about 60 micromolar, and then it still goes up. It still goes up, but it's more like this. But you don't want to be on the steep part. So you absolutely want to be above 50. You start turning the curve at around 60, and you don't get to more of the higher parts of the sigmoidal vitamin C curve until you're at least 70. So to me, optimal blood levels are above 70, and that's where the lowest risk of numerous diseases are. And I know that there's problems with that as well, but there's no issue, in my opinion, of hitting 500 milligrams per day. You could get it through carnivore diets if you eat mostly organs.
Right.
So
the concerns I have about higher amounts of vitamin C are this, and I think that supplementation may be different than eating organs, but I think that, I don't know that I would go quite that high. There is some evidence that higher intakes of vitamin C are associated with more kidney stones. I'm sure you've seen these studies. So, this is a 2013 study from the Journal of the American Medical Association, and it's just ascorbic acid supplements and kidney stone incidence among men, a prospective study. And again, it's prospective epidemiology, but they found that in men who were supplementing, and the average I think was 1,000 milligrams a day of the ascorbic acid tablets, they had a statistically significant twofold increased risk of kidney stones. And
there's other prospective studies, though, that show actual lower incidences of kidney stones with vitamin C, and I can get into the reasons why. There is no definitive proof that vitamin C will increase kidney stones. If you don't tolerate oxalates well, there is a potential issue going over 1,000 milligrams, but definitely not at 500 milligrams, and certainly not in the general population.
Yeah, I mean, there was another study. It's another paper, vitamin C supplementation and urinary oxalate excretion, which is kind of a summary of two studies, and they found that there was a statistically significant increase in urinary oxalate in both controls and stone formers at vitamin C supplementation. So it seems like there's probably a sweet spot here, because we probably don't want to be pushing extra oxalate in the kidney.
Look, you only form 1.5% of a vitamin C dose forms oxalates. You don't want vitamin C to oxidize in the body, because when you oxidize vitamin C, the primary metabolite is oxalates. So if you have metabolic syndrome or you have inflammation, that is more of a risk factor for increasing your oxalate load because of that. I wouldn't necessarily worry about vitamin C intakes from the diet at 500 to even 1,000 from the very small increase in oxalates. Again, because a very little bit of the dose is actually turned into oxalates from vitamin C.
It's more about the vitamin C recycling then, huh?
Of the oxidation of vitamin C and its breakdown, like breaking down, there's a certain ring on it. Once it gets oxidized too much, it'll turn into oxalate. So that's a big issue. B6 levels too determine, I believe, oxalate levels. And again, like oxalate that doesn't have a lot of calcium coming with it can potentially be an issue for people who don't handle oxalates well, but that is a minority of the population.
Yeah. The other thing that I was curious for me about vitamin C, and again, this is a specific population, is people with G6PD.
Yeah, they mention that in review papers, and then other review papers say that there is no definitive proof that people with G6PD are going to have like hemolysis from vitamin C. It's right now, it's complete conjecture.
There's a case report that I found from 2017, effective high dose vitamin C infusion in G6PD deficient patient. I don't know. Have you seen that one? It seems like he got hemolysis.
Well, if you infuse vitamin C, you're talking about levels 100 times more than you would get with oral. So that's a total different beast.
Yeah. And in that situation, I mean, some people will point to the efficacy of vitamin C in sepsis, and I think, well, they're using IV vitamin C, and it's probably acting as a pro-oxidant rather than an antioxidant in that situation. I think that when we put lots of vitamin C into the circulation, in the case of G6PD, what we see is that these people have glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. They can't recycle NADPH to make more glutathione in the red blood cells. And so when they get these high doses of vitamin C and they get hemolysis, it's indicating that there's some pro-oxidant thing going on. So with these high doses of vitamin C IV, it's clearly having a pro-oxidant role. Now, whether or not you could achieve that with oral dosing is questionable, probably not. But I'm pretty skeptical of IV vitamin C unless it's for very specific indications. But it is a curious thing. I mean, this is what people have when they get favism. They eat fava beans and they get hemolysis because there's an oxidative toxin in fava beans that causes people with G6PD deficiency to have hemolysis of the red blood cells because they can't recycle any DPH. They can't make enough glutathione to manage the oxidative status in the red blood cells. And so this is one indication of a pretty...
Keep in mind, IV vitamin C is going to give you like a 13,000 micromolar level of vitamin C, whereas like we're sitting around 70 micromolar. So, that's 100-fold difference.
Yeah, it's pretty high. It's pretty high. I think that that's cool. Thanks for talking about the vitamin C. I wish we could all eat fresher animals,
Right. Yeah. No, it's a huge issue. And it's one of the reasons why I take a little bit more precaution when I cook my meat. So most people I never thought, I was always like, dude, we ate meat for 2.5 million years. How the heck could it be bad for you? And then I ran across this paper and then I started going down this rabbit hole and it led me to some interesting information. So I just take some extra precautions. So when blood flow stops flowing to muscle, basically you get a buildup of lactic acid. So the pH in muscle goes from 7.4 to 6.4. And that lactic acid slowly starts breaking down the porphyrin ring surrounding iron. And the longer you hang meat, the more free iron that's released. And it's been shown that this free iron starts oxidizing the fats, definitely the polyunsaturated fats, and increases lipid like peroxides. So like the difference between eating fresh animals to 2 weeks versus now we consume store-bought or grocery-bought meat that's 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks old because it's hung and there's transportation time. It definitely has more lipid hydroperoxides without question than the meat that we used to consume. Whether that is, an issue or not, I just take extra precautions because of that. And there are definitely studies showing like when you freeze meat, you increase protein and lipid oxidation products, and how you cook meat is really important. So what I try to do, I try to buy meat as fresh as possible. I don't try to eat out of a can, which will definitely oxidize the omega-3s. Because they use very high heat to seal the canned food. So as fresh meat as possible, I think is super important. And then your friends when cooking, like spices are super important. When I cook, I use a ton of spices, turmeric, rosemary, extra virgin olive oil, to prevent some of the advanced glycation end products, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, heterocyclic amines that do form if you cook at a high temperature. Right. Acid is your friend. Vinegar is your friend when cooking meat. So I use a lot of vinegar. And like low sugar barbecue sauces a lot, and I'll do the crock pot a lot. Lower temperature is definitely the way to go when cooking most of your meat because of that. And again, I think I take certain things to help potentially prevent some of that damage, like spirulina, chlorella, things like that. Here's one thing I wanted to let you know is that kidneys actually do store cadmium. The reason why cadmium is a nephrotoxin is because it does accumulate in kidneys. And I know you're a big kidney eater. I'm sure probably White Oaks pasture probably has like probably very clean animals, but it would be interesting to know what their cadmium levels are. Like the studies I looked at from non-contaminated animals, the safe level of intake for kidney is anywhere from 0.2 ounces to 5 ounces based on a maximum cadmium intake of 30 micrograms per day. So that's a wide range, right? And so it's like, because animal foods are a little more contaminated now with toxic heavy metals, it's just another thing we have to just somewhat think about. And so I kind of use certain things to bind those potential heavy metals if I am eating kidneys. Or liver has about 3 times less cadmium, so I'm not as concerned about liver, but kidneys I do get a little worried about.
I wonder, there's a lot of cadmium that accumulates in shellfish too. It's like we're just stuck, like we've just polluted the earth, and maybe that's about figuring out where you're getting the meat from. And it's got to be bioaccumulation from soil and what they're being fed. So we just don't know what the quality of any particular farm is or any particular organ you're getting. Like where how much cadmium is in that.
It's crazy because cadmium can go up into the air and then it can fall down with rainfall. So
Yeah.
like, it's crazy. And what's interesting about vitamin C too is that like 94% of the population is now breathing polluted air, and we have depleted the ozone layer and we're getting more UV radiation, which both of those, ingesting polluted air and more UV radiation, will increase your needs for vitamin C. So that was just another interesting thing that I think about. I try to like put dietary nutrition and what I do in like a 21st century perspective.
Yeah, it is kind of, I think it's valuable. There's just not, we're not running around in loincloths, for better or for worse, but it's like we've just, and it scares me with fish as well. Like we've just polluted the ocean so badly that I think that we need to eat some fish every once in a while.
Like the Inuit, they don't even have good cardiovascular health anymore because they get so much heavy metals from polluted marine mammals. So like the Inuit, when you look at like autopsy studies from the 50s and 60s, I've published about 3 papers on this in the medical literature. They had like one of the lowest incidence of heart disease.
Right.
It was extremely low on autopsy, and they had very low rates of diabetes. If not, they virtually didn't have any diabetes, and they weren't dropping dead of like sudden chest pain ever. So they might've had some atherosclerosis, but they weren't dying of it. And so that goes to show you can eat a true nose to tail, primarily 80-90% carnivore diet, and basically be virtually absent of cardiovascular disease. Again, they were probably getting decent amounts of vitamin C on how they ate, but now because they're eating these polluted marine mammals, they're just way sicker than ever.
And then we're all kind of eating sick animals now, it's so hard. Like what, I guess that's why farms like White Oak are such a big deal, or places that you trust, get your food from somewhere that because
that's why I take Chlorella, which absolutely combine not only heavy metals, but pesticides and persistent organic pollutants and flame retardants. Like if you look at wild animals, they are saturated in like, all these persistent organic pollutants and flame retardants and heavy metals. And so Chlorella does bind those, and spirulina in clinical studies have been shown to reduce the damage from those substances as well. So that's why I'll always take spirulina and Chlorella with specifically organs, definitely kidneys, but really with any meal.
Do you eat kidneys at all anymore because of the cadmium?
No, I do. I typically eat liverwurst, which has a little bit of mixture of, I think it's like 50% like muscle meat. And I think that the rest is like a mixture of kidney, heart, and liver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The studies that I saw on Chlorella were not impressive for binding persistent organic pollutants. We may or may not go down that rabbit hole right now, but we can.
I can send you them. I have a ton of them.
Yeah. The ones that I've seen suggest that things like, zeolite or cholestyramine are better, but at least one of the ones I saw suggested that Chlorella wasn't so good at persistent organic pollutants. I mean, we can talk about
for sure. Like I think it's been even shown like in pregnant women who take Chlorella that their babies have less dioxins. It's like been proven in human studies. Absolutely does bind them and does reduce them, and can even pull them. It doesn't even reduce not only the absorption, but like what's in your body, it can actually pull and bind those as well.
Because of the enterohepatic recycling.
Yeah, here's the thing too about persistent organic pollutants and why I consume fiber and lignans, which can bind them, is not just from dietary sources. So we've been storing persistent organic pollutants since birth. We got a huge dose during breastfeeding, and our parents have been consuming them. And some of them are literally stored for decades. And they do get released when you lose fat. And there's this enterohepatic recycling, and it's very difficult for us to get rid of them. And like fiber and lignans can bind them in the intestinal tract, even the ones you're releasing from your stored fat. And there are definitely studies that have shown that you release at least 15 to 20 different types of persistent organic pollutants that can be neurotoxic to your brain. It does go through the circulation, and then again, that enterohepatic recycling.
Yeah. My feeling is that the plant fiber is not worth eating to get rid of persistent organic pollutants.
Yeah, I figured you would say that.
Yeah. I mean, you can test. So if dioxins are an interesting thing. So persistent organic pollutants are interesting. If we look at the levels, they've declined a lot since the 70s, and they've gone down like 95%. And there's some interesting literature. I don't think we know enough about these. I don't think they're talked about enough or tested for. The literature, I think that the general thinking is that they're higher in animals, but there's a number of studies now that show that they're in plants too. I mean, if you look at studies from like Greece, the Netherlands, Finland, Russia, they're in everything, and the levels are very variable. And seafood is some of the worst, unfortunately, in terms of persistent organic pollutants. But there's a number of studies that, if you haven't seen them, I can send you, that show that olive oil is often even higher than pork, and sometimes pork has none or beef has none, and sometimes it's in the middle. And so they're everywhere. And again, I think this is probably the whole theme of this conversation, and I love it. Like we've destroyed the planet. Like I don't even know what's going to happen to future generations, and it's almost like damage control now. And you and I are both just trying to figure out how to eat in the best way possible amongst this damaged environment. I don't mean this podcast to be fear mongering for people. I just want the information to be out there. I think some people might hear this and be like, what can I eat? There's nothing left to eat. Everything is polluted. Yeah. And the sad fact of the matter is that yes, everything is polluted. The water you're drinking is polluted. The air we're breathing is polluted. And we don't have a great way. And so I think that these ideas like chlorella are fascinating. The plant fiber is not how I would mitigate dioxins because of all the other problems with plant fiber, whether it's binding up other minerals, all the plant compounds it's going to come with. So there's pretty good evidence that plant fiber is going to come with phytic acid. We can talk about that one too. And that's going to deplete other minerals from our bodies. I think that if people are worried about dioxins, you can easily get a blood dioxin level. You can test your levels of dioxin, which can be measured in TEQ units, the total equivalency units for dioxins. And if it's high, you can use chlorella, or you could use zeolite, or you could use cholestyramine for a short amount of time to kind of get them out of the enterohepatic recycling. But I would opt for a different strategy than like long-term plant fiber for them, but I understand why you do it. And my hesitations around plant fiber are many.
I mean, eat grass-fed meat too. Like, don't cheap out, and definitely organic produce. A lot of people think it's controversial, but there was a very large meta-analysis that definitely shows that organic produce has significantly less levels of heavy metals, particularly cadmium. And we published an editorial showing this, and it has, greater amounts of, phytonutrients and less pesticides, and more flavonoids. So eat fresh, eat as clean meat as possible, and eat as clean fruits and vegetables as possible. And I know you're a carnivore, so you're going to take the other half of that, but that's fine. Right.
Yeah.
Well, what blew my mind like a week ago, I don't ever talk about like money or saving money. I'm not like a frugal person, but like one thing that is interesting is when I replaced 20 ounces of muscle meat, like grass-fed muscle meat, which is like, like grass-fed meat on average is probably like $12 a pound. With plant foods, I'm saving like $8 to $10 a day. Like over the course, I'm gonna have like 200 grand more to retire just by replacing some of my grass-fed meat. I know it's kind of crazy.
Think about all the nutrients you're missing though, man. That's gotta be that's a negative effect. That's a net negative.
Here's how much I do consume a good amount of animal foods though. Let me be clear about that. And let me tell you why I think I'm sort of hitting enough. So I consume about 12 ounces of muscle meat. That's going to give me like 70 grams of protein, which I think is important, why people should try to hit at least that amount of muscle meat.
I definitely think people need at least that amount of protein.
Yep. So that's why I do that. That's why I consume about 12 ounces of muscle meat per day. It's also going to give me good amounts of zinc, selenium, and B12.
Sure.
And because I consume 3 to 4 pastured eggs a day, and I consume salmon roe twice a week, and I consume liverwurst twice a week, I'm good. Why would I need more muscle meat than that? And then I supplement with plant foods. I just do. I just like tubers, and I like other plant foods, and it's way cheaper, and I'm saving $10 a day, and that's $200,000 more I'm going to have in my retirement. And if my wife does it, that's $400,000 more. It's kind of interesting though.
But I see that as a negative. I think that nutritionally that you would be better off with more nutrients by eating more animal foods.
Well, the thing is I get all the nutrients from the animal foods that are low in plants. Like I mentioned, I hit my RDAs for B12 and zinc and selenium. And then the other nutrients like manganese and vitamin C, I bring back with the plant foods. And that's why I do it. I don't think my diet eating salmon roe and liverwurst and, 12 ounces of muscle meat and 3 to 4 pastured eggs, plus then about 1 pound to 20 ounces of plant foods. There's no way I am not eating a super nutrient dense diet.
But you have to admit that the plant foods are becoming a filler in this situation.
No, because they're upping my vitamin C and they're upping my manganese and we just differ on the benefits of plant foods. Like most people think plant foods and phytonutrients work as antioxidants. They primarily work through reducing the breakdown of NRF2 and also breaking down the inhibitor KEAP1 and NRF2. So they upregulate our own antioxidant response elements.
Because they're pro-oxidants.
Correct, but a little bit of a toxin though. That's how exercise works. That's how anything that actually works.
Let's talk about this. This is this is huge. This is an important subject. So I disagree with David Sinclair, who I recently talked to, and you on the concept of molecular xenohormesis. And so here's what I think people are missing. I do agree that exercise, heat, cold, even fasting to some extent activate NRF2. There are these environmental hormetics, right? And NRF2 has this protein KEAP1, which keeps it dormant. And when you degrade KEAP1, NRF2 does its thing. It's glutathione peroxidase. It's a number of enzymes involved. It's SOD2, I think, superoxide dismutase. It's a number of enzymes involved in upregulating our endogenous antioxidant response and making more glutathione. Right. Where I think people are confusing this with plant molecules is that the plant molecules may do this and they do a bunch of other negative stuff in our body that we don't need. But we don't need the plant molecules. I think there's really good evidence. We don't need plant molecules to make enough glutathione. We don't need plant molecules to activate NRF2. I mean, if we want to get really granular about this, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and the heterocyclic amines also activate NRF2. So there are many things we can do in our life that activate NRF2. I've never seen convincing evidence that we need plants to get more glutathione. I think we can make plenty of glutathione just by the environmental hormetics that we're getting. And the plant molecules I see as a net negative because of the damage they do other places in the body that is so often ignored. So phorafane, let me just talk, I'll just finish the thought. So phorafane is like the prototypical NRF2 activator, and this is Rhonda Patrick's love child, right? And the problem here is that then sulforaphane, which is an isothiocyanate, this class of molecules has been found to do all these other negative things in the body. And this is what I sort of discovered when I was thinking about the carnivore diet. I was like, wait a minute, like these plant molecules are sold to us as beneficial antioxidants. And if we look other places in the human body, they do negative things. They do, and we don't know how bad they are for us. I've heard you talk about 4-HNE, 4-hydroxynonenal, a very potentially inflammatory oxidized lipid in our body. There's plenty of studies that show that sulforaphane induces the formation of 4-HNE. And there are studies that show that isothiocyanates compete with iodine at the level of the thyroid. And people might say, oh, it's insignificant. But then I say, yeah, but when you're eating 1.5 pounds of vegetables per day, you're putting in tons of these plant molecules.
Yeah, well, I'm not eating 1.5 pounds of broccoli. I'll be clear about that.
But you're eating 1.5 pounds of all of them together, right? You're putting in hundreds of these molecules. And my concern is like, if they're not clearly positive, I think that one of the reasons that we see benefit with a carnivore diet clinically is that removing them is only up levels us, right? We get rid of these things. We don't need these molecules to get enough glutathione. We don't need any more NRF2 activation. And then we get rid of their collateral damaging side effects, which are the real problem here that everybody ignores. Because a lot of people love to tout sulforaphane or whatever molecule, resveratrol. I was talking to David Sinclair. He's like all excited about resveratrol. But resveratrol also messes with our hormonal precursors, right? It lowers DHEA. It's been shown to worsen metabolic syndrome in some people and cause dysglycemia. Resveratrol also causes oxidation. So that's my concern with these plant molecules, is that there's like this unseen damage they're doing in the body because they're not really common. They're not looking like us.
Me and you are both stuck. I'm concerned about the free iron ions that are released during, the storage of meat, and the 4-HNE that forms when that iron hits the polyunsaturated fats, even in your stomach. So meat increases 4-HNE.
Right.
And so me and you are sort of like stuck in this molecular, but there's no clear negative effects of a pure carnivore diet, and there's no clear negative effects of a whole food plant-based diet. Like if you actually look at the whole foods plant-based diet randomized controlled studies, none of them show negative effects. They all show improvements in A1C and quote unquote reversing diabetes and improvements in pancreatic beta cells. And if they didn't, no one would eat a whole food plant-based diet, but anything's better than that standard American diet. So I'm not saying that it's the plants that are beneficial. There's no clear evidence, though, that eating carnivore is harmful from my theories of free iron ions and lipid peroxides. And there's no clear evidence of harm from your theories. But me and you are pretty smart, and there's probably a threshold. If you're eating if you're just eating grilled cow steaks, 4 pounds of that every single day, that's probably not healthy. Or if you're eating 4 pounds of broccoli every single day, let's meet in the middle, because it probably kind of meets that way.
Yeah. And I think that in people who are eating an omnivorous diet and crushing it, I'm super stoked for them. And what I'm really excited about is the people who are not doing well and they have some plants in their diet, to offer them this carnivore solution, this carnivore option, and say, hey, like, here's a way to do a carnivore diet. I think that there are a lot of people out there, when they eliminate plant foods, it doesn't have to be forever, but people out there, when they eliminate plant foods, they feel better. Yes. And you make a fantastic point that we don't have really any population or epidemiology studies to show that plants are harmful. I mean, there's also no population or there's not a lot of studies, especially interventional studies, that show that plants are beneficial. And I've talked about those a lot, and I'm sure you've seen those. When they take plant foods out of the diet of people, they don't see any change in the markers of oxidative stress or inflammation or DNA damage. So I kind of struggle with the arguments that plants are helping us. But there's no great studies that show that plants are hurting us, unless it's somebody that had lupus or Crohn's and took it out of their diet and is now better. So I think at a population level, it's hard to do those studies. Really, what we're seeing now is just anecdotal evidence, lots and lots of it, hundreds of people who are like, man, I feel so much better without plants. And I'm like, that's amazing. Here's my best effort for how to do it the best way you can. But if people are crushing it and they're having plants in their diet, I don't think there's a reason to take it out. I think some people can tolerate more.
Can I put you on record for saying that?
Yeah, I've said that before. That's not radical. Yeah, I mean, I've said that before. I'm trying not to be dogmatic. I mean, but I think that there's like this genetic.
I love like the carnivore movement because of that, because there are definitely people, not for the general population, I don't see it that frequently, but there are definitely people who don't tolerate plants. And it's so cool that the carnivore movement offers them a solution. And I think a lot of vegans and pro plant-based people should give their hats off to the carnivore movement for at least allowing these people to have an alternative. And I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I titled my book The Carnivore Code, and now I'm thinking it should have been called The Carnivore Solution. Maybe I'll have to change the title at the last minute. But who knows? But I think, yeah, if somebody is eating an omnivorous diet and they're doing great, like, look, if somebody's got energy and libido and body composition and mental clarity, like, why would you change it as long as you're getting some animal foods, okay? But what's so cool is that, like, look, there's thousands of people now who are saying, wow, I feel even better doing full carnivore. And the things that really like make me fall out of my chair, like the emails I get every day from people with psoriatic arthritis or lupus or Crohn's. And again, it's just anecdotal at this point. We need to do more studies, but who say, hey, I took plants out and things are getting really a lot better. And so I think, yeah, there's something to this, right? I think plants can harm some people. And that statement alone is so radical to the general population. That's kind of what carnivore is about for me. Like, hey, if you're not well, like, think about the fact that plants could harm you. And one of the things I talk about in the book is, hey, look, I'm not trying to tell everyone to eat no plants for the rest of their life. But I think for a lot of people, and eliminating them for some amount of time is the beginning of an amazing elimination reintroduction cycle. And they can really figure out which plants are harming them. But 98% of the physicians out there right now and clinicians don't even think that a plant could be bad. Within the functional medicine community, it's just eat the rainbow. And I think that's not the right idea. And I get really excited about kind of sounding the alarm, or at least just beating the drum a little bit and saying, hey, look, these plant compounds may not be all they're cracked up to be. But I really appreciate your perspective too, because it's challenging me to realize that the animals that I'm eating today are not the animal. They're not pure.
Right.
And I think that there's certainly room within the carnivore movement or all these health movements to think like, do we need to adjust to the total context of where we are today, which is not where
Come
we
over to
were.
my diet. Come over to the Omnivore diet.
I've done it, man. I mean, I was, so, my story, I was like organic paleo for years and years and had really bad eczema that just recurred and recurred and recurred. And when I went carnivore, I was like, man, I just felt so clear headed and I just felt better. I had more mental clarity and more emotional resilience. And I thought there's something to this. Like those plant compounds were really, I mean, this is just my narrative, right? It's obviously biased, but I was like, I think those plant compounds were affecting me negatively. I didn't have depression or anxiety that I was aware of, but when I cut them out, I thought, man, I just feel better. And I really haven't felt better when I've put them back in. I've done 3 or 4 reintroduction experiments and nothing crazy, but I've had I've had squash a few times. That's been the main thing. And I've just been like, what? I don't feel that much better at all. Like I don't feel any different than what I'm doing now. I definitely don't think that's a whole separate podcast. Long-term ketosis or the absence of plant fiber is a bad thing. But to be fair, I haven't checked my blood dioxin levels. I don't know. I don't know where I'm at in terms of some of those persistent organic pollutants, and I want to check them in the future. And I do try to source my meat from the best places I can. Obviously I get it from White Oak Pastures, all grass fed. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be lower in those types of things. But I do.
The thing is too, like what's cool about your story is everybody is genetically different. Some people have more copies of amylase and they break down carbs better and they have better release in insulin and they handle carbs better. And I didn't do well on like a very low carb carnivore diet. I didn't have energy, and for me, and I know a lot of carnivore, like for you, you had the opposite, right? Which is why we're all different. Yeah. Like when I started eating more undercooked sweet potatoes and more plant foods, my exercise was way better. My blood pressure dropped by like 20 points. So for me, it was better for me. Yeah. But if I were to eliminate the 50% of animal foods, I guarantee you I would not be feeling as good as I am now. So I do appreciate so much what animal foods can do for health.
Yeah, they're critical for health. And I think there's all this nuanced discussion about how much omnivory each person should do. I often get comments from very savvy people who follow me on Instagram saying, I think that the plant-based arguments are pretty weak, and with Game Changers just coming out, it's a little bit tragic that people are thinking I should go vegan. It's like, look, no, I think that the majority of people know that that's propaganda. But I think that these types of discussions in the gray area are much more nuanced and it's much less clear. And there's probably genetic variation. Yeah. I wonder, and I'm open to the possibility that some people are just going to feel better with some plants. I kind of scratch my head and I go, I don't understand why that would be. Maybe you didn't. I wonder if you didn't tolerate. I wonder if you had polymorphisms and you just didn't tolerate ketose as well.
I might not convert. I might not make glucose as well from protein and fat. I may do better with more fiber, and who knows? I might
definitely not the fiber, not the fiber.
we can debate. I do believe in the benefits of some resistant starch 100%. We can debate all day, right? For me, I don't know what it was, but I think I was getting just more potassium too from the beans in the tubers. I'm smart too. I don't overcook them, and I always consume them with protein. People, a lot of people are like, I would never eat a tuber. It's going to spike my like blood sugar. If you consume it with some fat and some protein, it really doesn't. And I think a lot of people too really fear spikes in glucose. And if we had like because you go to the doctor and you can check your glucose levels, and we do really fear blood glucose a lot. But if we had monitors checking our dioxin levels or heterocyclic amines or lipid peroxides after we ate meat, we might be a little bit more afraid of meat. Who knows? The problem is we super focus on glucose, which somewhat bias us to not, to fear plant foods a little bit more.
Yeah, I will add that I think that a focus on glucose is quite helpful, though. I think CGMs and looking at glucose has been hugely helpful for so many people, and that we know that postprandial elevation in blood glucose, these mean amplitude glucose excursions appear to be pretty damaging to the endothelium and the glycocalyx. And so I do think that that's probably not a good thing. I mean, I had a podcast with Chris Masterjohn, like we talked about, and he said, well, you don't think glucose is toxic, do you? And I said, no, not really. But then again, if you give somebody an OGTT, if you give somebody an oral glucose tolerance test and you give them 75 grams of just ingestible glucose in a solution, that looks pretty toxic to humans, like that's not a good thing either. So it's nuanced. And then I think, every time I look at a sweet potato, I just think oxalates now. And I think that there's, I think there's definitely genetic variation in terms of how we process oxalates. There's a decent amount in there.
I don't want us to though.
Your sigh.
Because we're sorting to what we used to do to sodium and what we did to saturated fat. I don't want us to do to oxalates and start nitpicking small things, because it's very nuanced. And I mean, the Okinawans ate a ton of sweet potatoes. I think primarily most people aren't undercooking. They're overcooking the heck out of a sweet potato, and they don't realize the difference that has in, blood glucose spikes and reducing the amount of resistant starch. And, resistant starch does increase GLP-1, which has a broad spectrum, increasing insulin sensitivity and all these other things. And I know you don't believe in resistant starch, but I
don't see a utility for it. I did another podcast with a physician named Vincent Pedre. It probably won't be out when this one comes out. We'll see. But, I don't see the utility of resistant starch. People will say, oh, we need resistant starch for short chain fatty acids. And that's just not true. I mean, we know that we can make isobutyrate from protein. We don't need short chain fatty acids from plant fiber. We can make plenty of short chain fatty acids from protein that activate all the same receptors as butyrate and are just as effective at crossing the membrane of colon epithelial cells and providing benefit. When we're in ketosis, we can get beta hydroxybutyrate from the bloodstream, which is actually intermediate. Once we uptake butyrate or isobutyrate, it becomes beta hydroxybutyrate in those cells. So I think in terms of the gut microbiome, there's very clear cases where removal of fiber is necessary for the healing of the gut. And I also did a podcast with Michael Ruscio on his podcast, and he was mentioning that he felt like when people had disordered guts, they tolerated plant foods worse. And I thought, isn't that interesting? And this may go back to using the carnivore diet as a temporary thing or a cleanse or for people. But I do think that the sicker our guts are, the less able we are to digest plant foods. And in that type of a situation, being in ketosis can be so valuable because it provides beta hydroxybutyrate for the colonic epithelial sites through the circulation. We don't have to use butyrate from the gut. If there's overgrowth of hydrogen sulfide organisms, that can impair the oxidation of butyrate. We can't get it into the colon cells. So relying on short chain fatty acids when our gut is sick and disordered doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So I've not really seen any need for resistant starch in the human diet. Maybe you feel differently, but I've just been like, I don't think we need it at all. There's no benefit that I've seen to it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I integrated more resistant starch foods, I felt better. Right. I just did. And maybe my microbiome does better by feeding off of that resistant starch and producing the butyrate directly. Hard to say, and we're all different. And so
it shifts. There's always that shift.
Listen, we would have consumed resistant starch evolutionarily. How much would differ depending on our geographical region. It's always been with us. So I think we evolved some type of benefit. Nowadays, I don't think though that people are really consuming, the foods that would provide resistant starch in a good way. Most whole grains that people think are giving them good resistant starch are ran through a steel roller mill, and they're nothing like traditional whole grains. And yeah, I agree. There are definitely people that if they have gut issues, they don't do well with plant foods. And it's like, do what works for you,
Yeah. And I think the gut flora can shift. And that's one of the things that happens at the beginning of a carnivore diet is that the gut flora shifts probably to be more, less of the butyrate producers and more of the producers that do other things. How long did you try a full carnivore diet?
I mean, it was probably 98% carnivore. It was less than 20 carbs. So yeah, I don't know. I just, after a couple of years, I just, my stomach expanded a little bit. You did
98% carnivore for years?
For a couple of years, I was probably just eating, 2 pounds of pork chops basically, and maybe 1 wasn't pure carnivore, but it was probably 20 grams or less of carbs. And I just feel well.
Were you doing nose to tail?
No, that's the thing too. I wasn't doing nose to tail. It was mostly muscle meat and
muscle meat and eggs. So
that potentially could have had an effect too.
Yeah. It's interesting to troubleshoot. I mean, again, like I said, if you're clearly crushing it now and feeling good, I don't think there's any reason to change, Right. But I do think there's some nuance here for people. And man, we covered a lot, dude. Thanks. Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up? I think we covered almost everything.
Yeah, no, I think we did a good job.
Cool. So where can people find more of your stuff, your website, your books, all this kind of stuff?
They can go to my website at drjamesdinic.com. And Amazon, has Super Fuel I co-authored with Mercola on like what are the healthier fats to eat. And obviously the Salt Fix and the longevity solution with Jason Fung too.
Yeah, I was going to say if I did Carnivore solution, it was like taking the Jason Fung title, but everybody's doing code these days too. So who knows? We'll see. Maybe people are hearing it for the first time. Maybe the book title's changing. Maybe not. We'll see. Carnivore code has good alliteration. Yeah. All right. The last question I always ask people on the podcast is, what is the most radical thing that you have done recently, my friend?
Dude, I am a dad of 2, so it gets as radical as it gets for me is like playing dollhouse with my daughter and playing catch football, watching NFL games with my son. That's as radical as it gets for me.
Where are you you're in Missouri, right?
I actually live in Rochester, New York.
Oh, Rochester, so you're way up north. Okay, cool. Yeah. Cool. Well, if you want to come to White Oak Cello, we'd love to see you December 14th and 15th in Georgia.
Sure. Give me a link.
Yeah, I'll definitely get you a link to that. And then I hope we'll continue the conversation, man. We got to do part 2 soon and think about this, but I appreciate you coming on so much. I think we had some great discussions, and thanks for your time, my man.
Thanks, brother.
All right. You amazing, beautiful, radical, what other adjectives can I use? Fantabulous, spectacular, just, amazing people. I so am appreciative of all of your support through this process. I'm so excited for the book. I talked about that at the beginning. Please support that project and get ready for it because it is a doozy, you guys. It is a doozy. There are over 600 references, ended up being 373 pages total. 373 pages, you guys. Amazing. I've got the tiers in there. I've got all kinds of good stuff in there. I just got back from a hunting trip. And it was amazing. I went out there with some of my good friends, some new people I hadn't met, maybe some of the people that were on the hunting trip are listening to this podcast. Shout out to you guys. I love you all. I was able to take a deer with my bow. It was a very spiritual experience. And after I killed the deer, I was able to walk up to it and sort of thank it for the life that it gave for me. And man, that is a spiritual, moving experience to know in my heart that I have a responsibility to live well because I am eating the best foods on the planet. None of us want to kill animals, but in order for something to live, something else must die. This is the way of life, and we should do it respectfully and know where it comes from. So the other thing that kind of ties into that I'm super excited about is regenerative agriculture and farms like Rome Ranch, which I got to visit there, which has incredible buffalo. I'm going to be talking about Rome more. Belcampo, which I'm going to be talking about more in Northern California, White Oak. These farms are putting nutrients back in the soil, and the soil organic matter is increasing. When we increase the amount of organic matter in the soil by 1%, a hectare, don't quote me on this, this is give or take, I'm freestyling here, but these are about the numbers that I read. A hectare of land can hold over 20,000 more gallons per hectare for every 1% organic matter in the soil. White Oak's soil is 5 to 6% organic matter. 25 feet away across a fence line at the neighbors, their soil is 0.5%. When we destroy the land with monocrop agriculture, the organic matter is depleted. At Rome Ranch, when they started 3 years ago, their soil was about 0.4% organic matter. They've increased it every year by 50%, they said, and that's generally what happens with regenerative agriculture. Belcampo has also increased the organic matter in the soil. Basically, if there's one number that I'm excited about, it's fasting insulin. The second most important number I'm excited about is the amount of organic matter in the soil. I got you guys there, didn't I? I surprised you. The percentage of organic matter in the soil matters, and it's just an incontrovertible argument for ruminant agriculture. If we remove ruminants from this planet, the soil will collapse and our ecosystems will collapse. I mean, I don't think Greta Thunberg or River or Hook in Phoenix understands this at all. These guys don't get it. They're not educated. And people in the plant-based communities, I think, are not understanding this point either. Show me the diet that increases the amount of organic matter in the soil. It includes animals, period, because animals have to poop on the land. If we remove them, the soil matter goes down, period. You can't do this without fertilizer. What's the fertilizer? Animal poop. You can do biodynamic plant agriculture, but you need worm castings at least. So we need animals, and ruminants are a great source of this, and no, their farts are not a significant contributor to greenhouse gases. I've talked about this all the time. I can't wait to do more podcasts about this. Anyway, that's what's up with me. Regenerative agriculture is on my brain, and I got a new t-shirt. Check that out. I got my book coming out. Going to be amazing. I'm going to be at the Arnold this year. That's the first time I talked about that. So maybe I'll see some of you guys there. I'm going to be at KetoCon this year and buy somebody that pre-ordered my book a steak. And yeah, I'm loving life, you guys. Stoked to be a part of this. Stoked to have you all in the tribe. Subscribe to the newsletter, carnivoremd.com, to get the inside. All right, guys, I will see you in the next podcast. Have a great week.